I found a VHS tape that shouldn't exist, and this story is gone. Start like any other story where I begin by explaining how I got into collecting old media in the first place. It was during the early 2010s when I was a teenager, and I was obsessed with technology. But not modern technology, antique technology. The internet was filled with stories about people finding old computers hidden in attics, dusty servers in abandoned hospitals, or even entire rooms of old computer equipment in the basement of an old school. The idea of these machines being left to rot really upset me. So I started hunting for old electronics that were being thrown out, so that I could restore them. This is also when I became obsessed with VHS tapes. They were completely worthless, and you could get a huge box of them for next to nothing. Plus, they were just really cool looking. At least that's what I told myself. Anyway, after years of searching, I built up a collection of hundreds of VHS tapes, most of which were pretty unremarkable. After all, they were garbage. But every once in a while, I would find something that was more interesting than the rest. Sometimes it was just random movies that I hadn't seen before. Sometimes it was weird educational tapes from the 80s and 90s, and sometimes it was just plain creepy. Most of these tapes didn't have covers, and some of the titles were either unreadable or completely made up. Occasionally I would get lucky and find a listing online for the exact same tape that I had, and I would learn what the movie or show was called. But most of the time, there was no trace of these tapes on the internet at all. And I should probably mention here that if you try searching for these tapes yourself, you won't find anything because I'm just making all of these titles up. But this brings me to the weirdest part of my VHS story. Sometimes when I would insert one of these unidentified tapes into my VCR, instead of a movie or TV show, something else would play. I don't mean like a trailer or something. These videos had titles, subtitles, and even chapter menus just like any other VHS, except none of these videos were on the actual tape. I can't emphasize enough how bizarre this is. It's not like when you get a blank tape that has been recorded over and over again until it becomes unwatchable. The data from these videos was physically on the tape itself. Whenever I tried looking them up online, there was no trace of them anywhere. Now, the easiest explanation for this would be that they are simply lost media, but there's more to the story. See, I didn't just find a handful of these mysterious tapes. I found dozens of them. And it turns out that all of these tapes follow the same basic structure. Every single one starts with a title screen that looks exactly the same. It says VHS test footage at the top and then gives the title of the tape. Below that is a list of chapters with numbers 1 through 7. And every single one of these tapes follows this exact structure. Chapter 1 is always some sort of test pattern or color bars. Chapter 2 is always a really low-quality recording of someone walking up to a camera and saying things like, "How does the tape look?" Or "Can you hear me okay?" In some cases, the person on the tape will introduce themselves. But in most cases, they never do. There seems to be some sort of running gag where the person in Chapter 2 refuses to speak. But the person in Chapter 3 finally does. Chapter 4 is always the same. A very blurry and grainy black and white test recording of a person speaking for 2 minutes straight. Chapter 5 is always music. It's always an instrumental song that sounds like it was recorded in a bathroom. Chapter 6 is always an infomercial for some sort of weird health product. And Chapter 7 is always the same, a recording of nothing. It's literally just 8 minutes of black static with no audio. Now, to make matters even weirder, every single tape seems to be missing its first 3 chapters. When I say that these tapes have no trace on the internet, I mean that literally. There is no record of their existence anywhere. If you want proof, go ahead and search for any of the titles that I mentioned in this video. You won't find anything. But why would someone upload a partial tape to the internet? Why would they only upload chapters 4 through 7 and leave out chapters 1 through 3? Well, here's what I think happened. Back in the day, someone worked for a company that was creating test footage for VHS tapes. I don't know who this person was or what their name was, but we will call him Gary. One day Gary decided that he wanted to watch a movie on his VCR, but he needed to use the tape for work the next day. So instead of rewinding the tape all the way back to the beginning, he recorded over the first few minutes with some test footage and put the tape away. The next day he did the same thing again. And eventually he wound up with a tape full of test footage. This wasn't a big deal. It happened to the best of us. Except one day Gary's boss came over and saw the tape sitting around. Thinking that it was just a normal VHS, he put it in the VCR and watched it. Of course, all that he saw was a bunch of test patterns and low-quality recordings. He had no idea what it was, but he knew that he didn't like it. So he brought the tape home and told Gary that he needed to fix it. Now Gary knew that the tape was fine, but he also didn't want to get in trouble, so he made a copy of the original tape, erased the parts that his boss had watched, and then put it back in the box. The next day, Gary's boss came over again and asked him if he fixed the tape. So Gary said, "Of course I fixed it," and gave it to him. But this time, when Gary's boss put the tape in his VCR, it didn't start with the test footage anymore. Instead, it started with a blank spot, where Gary's boss had recorded over. Realizing what had happened, Gary's boss went home and ordered a bunch of blank VHS tapes. Then he went to everyone in his office and forced them to make a copy of their worst VHS tapes, so that he could erase them. After a few weeks, Gary's boss had a big box full of blank VHS tapes, all of which were recorded over at least once.
Oh.
But he didn't know what to do with them, so he put them all in his closet and forgot about them. Fast forward 30 years, and those boxes are now being sold at an antique store for $2.25 apiece. And that's how I ended up with a box full of VHS tapes that shouldn't exist. But wait, you might be thinking, there is still one question that hasn't been answered. Where did those clips come from? How did they end up on those VHS tapes? And the answer to that is pretty simple. Those clips didn't end up on the VHS tapes. They were always there. See, the reason why those clips seem to be missing from the beginning is because they were actually recorded backwards. Yes, every single clip on those tapes is recorded backwards. I spent hours sitting there watching these tapes forwards and backwards trying to figure out what was going on, and I can confidently say that all those clips are backwards. As for why they were recorded backwards, well, that's anyone's guess. Maybe the people who recorded them just liked to live life on the edge. Maybe they were trying to trick their future selves, or maybe they were trying to hide them from their future selves. Whatever the reason, the fact that they were recorded backwards is the only thing that makes any sense about these tapes. If you enjoyed this story, you should probably check out my podcast, where I talk about all sorts of strange and mysterious things that I've found online. Thanks for watching.